You ever have one of those days where you spend 10 hours building something beautiful and then you ruin it in exactly 6 seconds with a rattle can?
Is this about that custom gate you did for the neighbor? The one that ended up looking like it was recovered from a shipwreck?
It didn't look like a shipwreck. It looked like a Dalmatian with a skin condition. I figured, hey, it's just paint. How hard can it be? Turns out, metal doesn't just take paint because you asked it nicely. It has a memory for every thumbprint and speck of dust you forgot to wipe off. I ended up spending 3 days sanding back a mistake that took 10 minutes to make.
It's the classic maker's curse. We spend all this time on the structure, the welds, the joinery, and then treat the finish like an afterthought. But today, we're actually going to talk about how to keep our listeners from living your Dalmatian gate nightmare. We're diving deep into metal finishing, patinas, powder coating, and the humble, yet often misused, paint.
It really is the face of the project. You can have the most precise TEG welds in the world, smooth as a stack of dimes, but if the finish is garbage, the whole piece looks like a middle school shop project.
Let's start with the big one, powder coating. It's always held up as the gold standard for durability. Every time I see a mountain bike frame or a heavy-duty bumper, it's powder coated. Why is it so much tougher than standard paint?
Think of it like a suit of armor versus a thin rain jacket. When you paint, you're essentially laying down a liquid that dries as the solvent evaporates. It's thin. But powder coating? That's a whole different animal. You're spraying dry plastic dust, basically ground up resin, electrostatically onto the metal.
Electrostatically? So the metal basically acts like a magnet for the dust?
Exactly. You clip a ground wire to the part, the gun gives the powder a positive charge, and it wraps around the piece like a blanket. Then, and this is the magic part, you bake it in an oven. That dust melts, flows together, and chemically bonds into a thick, hard shell. It's why it doesn't chip when you hit it with a wrench. It's flexible too. It's one of the few finishes that won't just crack if the metal underneath flexes slightly.
Which is great, until you realize you chose safety orange and your wife wanted midnight navy. If it's that tough, what do you do if you mess up or need to change the color later? Can you actually paint over it?
It's the question people are terrified to ask because they think the answer is no. But you actually can. It's like trying to paint a sheet of ice. Powder coating is designed to be non-porous and slick. If you just spray over it, the new paint will peel off in sheets like a bad sunburn.
So what's the secret sauce? How do you get a bond on something that was literally engineered to resist everything?
It's all in the grit. You've got to scuff the ego out of that powder coat. I usually take some 180 or 20 grit sandpaper and just knock the gloss off. You're not trying to sand it down to the raw metal. That's a fool's errand and a waste of a good afternoon. You just want a matte surface. Once you've got that tooth, you hit it with a high adhesion primer. Something like Zinsser Bullseye 123. It's basically glue in a can.
So it's the same old story. Preparation is 90% of the job, and the actual finishing is the 10% victory lap.
It really is. And since we're talking about prep, if you're doing the powder coating yourself or sending it to a pro shop, the metal has to be surgical level clean. I'm talking could eat off it clean.
I've seen some shops use massive sandblasters. Is that strictly for removing rust, or is there a functional reason for the texture?
Both. It's called surface profiling. If you look at metal under a microscope after it's been sandblasted, it looks like the Rocky Mountains. All those tiny peaks and valleys give the powder something to grab onto. If you try to powder coat a piece of polished stainless steel without profiling it, that finish is going to pop off the first time it gets a temperature change.
Okay, so powder coating is the indestructible option. But what about aesthetics? Specifically the stuff that looks, well, intentional. I'm talking about patinas. I see these high-end architectural pieces that look like they've been sitting in a foggy forest for 50 years, even though they were made last Tuesday.
Oh, now you're talking about the dark arts. Patinas are where metalworking turns into chemistry class. Unlike paint, which sits on the metal, a patina is a controlled reaction with the metal. You're essentially speeding up time.
It feels a bit like cheating, doesn't it? Faking the age?
Think of it as curated aging. If you leave raw steel outside, it'll rust, sure, but it'll look like an old muffler. It'll be orange, flaky, and gross. But if you use something like a cold blue or a copper sulfate solution, you can get these deep blacks, iridescent oil slick blues, or that classic Statue of Liberty green.
I've seen you do that with some of the furniture you build. It looks incredible, but isn't it technically damaging the metal to get that look?
It is oxidation, yeah. But the trick is knowing when to stop the clock. Once you get the color you want, you have to neutralize the chemical and then seal it. That's the step people miss. If you don't seal a patina with a wax or a clear coat, the reaction just keeps going. I once did a beautiful black and steel coffee table, forgot to seal the underside, and 3 months later, the customer called me because their white carpet had a perfect black rectangle on it.
I bet that was a fun conversation. No, no, that's just evolving art, ma'am.
I wish I'd used that line. Instead, I was on my hands and knees with a steam cleaner for 4 hours.
We've talked about the rough and tough stuff, but what about the high detail work? I noticed in some of the manuals for medical equipment or aerospace parts, they use silk screening on metal. That feels so delicate for such industrial materials.
It's surprisingly robust. It's the same process used for t-shirts, but with specialized inks that bond to metal. If you need a control panel with tiny text that won't rub off after 10,000 fingers have touched it, silk screening is your best friend. It gives you precision that you just can't get with a brush or a spray gun.
Is that something a home hobbyist can realistically do? Or are we strictly in the realm of send it to a pro shop there?
You can do it at home, but the learning curve is a bit of a vertical wall. You're dealing with emulsions, light exposure for the screens, and the chemistry of the inks. For most makers, if they need text on metal, they're usually reaching for a laser engraver these days. But silk screening has a soul to it. The ink has a physical thickness you can feel. It's beautiful.
So let's bring this back to the person in their garage right now. They've finished their project. They're staring at a piece of raw aluminum or steel. How do they choose between these three?
It comes down to the 3Ds: duty, detail, and dollars.
All right, break those down for me.
If it's high duty, meaning it's going to be kicked, rained on, or tossed in the back of a truck, powder coating wins every time. It's the closest thing to set it and forget it. If you need high detail like labels or complex graphics, you're looking at silk screening or specialized painting. And if you're looking at dollars, well, a can of high quality automotive paint and a good primer is the cheapest entry point, but it requires the most sweat equity in terms of sanding and prep.
And the patinas? Where do they fit in the 3Ds?
Patinas are for the soul. They're for the pieces where you want the hand of the maker to show. You'll never get a powder coat to look like it was forged in an 18th century smithy.
You know, I think the most important thing I've learned from watching you struggle with your Dalmatian gate is that the finish isn't just a cover-up. It's the final word on the story you're telling with the build.
That's exactly it. And the most pro tip I can give anyone is this: buy the best degreaser you can find and use it 3 times more than you think you need to. Your skin has oils, the air has moisture, and your tools have grease. If you don't strip all of that off before you start, you're just building a house on a foundation of banana peels.
A foundation of banana peels. I'm putting that on a t-shirt.
Just make sure you silk screen it properly so it doesn't wash off.
Fair enough. Well, I think that's our deep dive for today. Whether you're baking powder in an old kitchen oven, which, by the way, Tiger says you should never use for food again,
Seriously, don't do it. Your pizza will taste like a PVC pipe.
or you're out there experimenting with chemicals to get that perfect aged look, just remember, your finish is only as good as the grit you put into the prep.
Well said. Now I've got a bracket here that needs a bit more soul and a lot more buffing.
Thanks for hanging out in the Tiger Den. We'll see you in the shop next time.